I was a kid, between the ages of 4 and 9, a shit ton of paranormal things happened to me. This is just one of them. I was in first grade, coming home from school. I was stoked for the candy cane party my teacher was going to throw. We were told that we all had to wear red and white. Well, when I got home, I was overwhelmingly tired, and that night, I had this strangely vivid dream about the party. It started by me arriving late to school. When I got into the classroom, my teacher informed me that she assigned everyone new seats. When I found my new seat, I noticed that the kid sitting next to me was only wearing red. I clearly remember the teacher telling everyone to wear red and white. So, I decided to ask him why he was breaking the rules. He replied by saying that he had followed the rules. He said, "I'm wearing a red shirt," and then he pointed to his face, and with a cheeky grin said, "And I'm white." Then he let out a devious-sounding chuckle under his breath. I guess he was technically right. He was white after all. I didn't know if the teacher would accept that explanation. I guessed he was one of those kids that like to try to bend the rules. And I guess it worked, since he wasn't sent to the principal. When I woke up the next morning, I thought that the dream was kind of strange, but nothing else really happened in the dream, so I didn't really think much of it until I realized that my dad woke me up late. It was then that I realized I'd be getting to school late. And that's when I started to get a really eerie feeling. I'm never late to school, and I have a dream about being late, and the next morning, I wake up late. Definitely an eerie feeling. When my dad finally dropped me off, I got to my classroom and had a really anxious feeling for some reason. I knew I wouldn't get in trouble for being late, so I didn't know why I was feeling so freaked out. Having a dream about being late and then having that come true the next day is a little freaky, but surely it was just a coincidence. I mean, that kind of thing happens all the time, right? So I tried to calm myself down by focusing on the fun I knew I was going to have at the candy cane party. I took a few deep breaths and straightened out my red and white shirt and walked in feeling excited. As soon as I walked in, I headed for my seat, but someone was already sitting there. But why? Then I noticed something was off. Everyone was in a different seat. Just then my teacher called out to me and said, "Yep, you guessed it." She said, "I've assigned everybody new seats," and pointed to mine on the opposite side of the room. As soon as she finished speaking, that anxious feeling I had came back instantly. But this time, it was way stronger. I thought to myself, one coincidence was no big deal, but what are the odds of having a dream where two things like this wound up being real? My teacher hadn't changed the seats before, so I didn't even know why I would have dreamt that. As I walked to my new seat, I tried to tell myself that even though it was really freaky, there was no reason to freak out. It was really strange, but I guess it's just another coincidence. I made my way over and kept my eyes on the floor, trying to avoid stepping on people's feet and book bags, and tried to convince myself not to think about my dream anymore. As I sat down, I realized I was so focused on not freaking out that I hadn't noticed the kid sitting next to me. After everything that just happened, there's no way the rest of it could have been true too. I was actually a little afraid to look over, but I couldn't help myself. I held my breath as I looked over, and what I saw made my heart drop. The kid sitting next to me was only wearing a red shirt. I couldn't believe my eyes. How could this be possible? I thought, maybe I'm dreaming. I guess I was staring at this kid a little too long because he gave me a really weird look. I don't blame him, because I think the look on my face probably made him uncomfortable. I'm not really sure what look I was giving him, but his weird expression snapped me out of my daze. And then he asked me why I was staring at him. I didn't know him, so maybe he was a new student. But I didn't want him to think I was some kind of crazy person, so I said the first thing that came into my head. I asked him why he wasn't wearing red and white. Now I'm sure you all know what he replied. He said he was wearing red and white, as he pointed at his face with a cheeky grin that sent chills up and down my spine. A few years ago, I was a trainee in a local supermarket. That may not be the most important point, but I guess a bit of background information is never a bad thing. Well, it happened that I had an early shift and needed to be at work at 6 a.m. It was late November, so it was dark when I jumped on my bike and left. Until then, everything was pretty normal. At least until I took a turn to the right. That was when I heard a scream. It wasn't a cat in a fight. I lived all my life with cats, and I know what they sound like when they scream. But it wasn't all human either. A shiver went down my spine. I remember it clearly. I went faster so I could leave this place and get somewhere safe. The next parts of my way were pretty calm. And then there was the bridge. To get to the street where the shop I worked in is located, I had to take a way under a heavy bridge. It's nothing unusual, and I didn't mind. But after I passed the bridge, I heard the same scream again, this time directly behind me. It felt like ice was flowing through my veins, and I quickly drove off. As I looked behind me to make sure nothing is following me, I saw a strange shadow, slightly formed as a human, but not fully. It's hard to describe. I heard the scream 3 more times until I moved. Since then, the screams stopped, and I never heard them again. But it still sends shivers down my spine whenever I think about it, or when I drive to work. The way is almost the same, except for a few parts. But those shivers, they'll never go away. When I was about 5 or 6 years old, my sisters and I used to share a room. Most nights, my older sister and I would see 2 distinct figures. She would see a lady in white standing in the doorway, directly in front of my bed. I would see a man with red eyes, or at least I thought it was a man, as all I could see were his red eyes. Though my sister could see the lady, she said she never spoke to her. She just stood there, getting closer every night. While I, on the other hand, would see a pair of bright red eyes staring at me from the closet. A disembodied masculine voice would whisper, "JJ, come to the closet and play," over and over. Sometimes my older sister and I would jump in each other's beds and hide under the blankets until morning. This was going on for months, until my dad decided to get the house blessed again. And we never saw them after that. I'm 24 now. My wife and I recently had a baby. I've been having weird dreams recently. They would always start with me standing in my son's room staring at the closet, and the familiar set of red eyes would stare back at me. My most recent dream, he actually spoke, his voice a lot deeper and booming than I remember. "You didn't come to play with me, but your son may be the one to play," he said before I woke up. I called my dad and told him about the whole thing. He told me he remembers me telling him about the man years before. But then, just then, He went silent for about 5 minutes. When he spoke again, he recounted seeing the same figure as a child. He also told me he remembered having the same dream after I was born. I've blessed my house twice already, but I can only protect my son so much. I just hope, I really, really hope, that he doesn't go play in the closet. I may never see him again. This next story is from a Reddit user named David. This is a pretty wild story, but I have personally spoken with David. He provided photos and documentation, so I can verify that this story is 100% true. David writes, "In my 40 years on Earth, I have seen some crazy shit. For example, I once helped a paranoid and delusional neighbor get treatment for a drug addiction and got locked out of my apartment. Then later on, I incubated a bacterial disease that caused my skin to break out into red, oozy sores. But this was much creepier. It all began on my drive home from work on a quiet summer afternoon after replacing a payment terminal at a gas station. Outside my van, the sky was clear blue and hot when my van climbed the last half mile of Mesaba Avenue in Duluth. Then it all fell apart when I turned left onto 4th Street to come upon a hysterical middle-aged Hispanic woman screaming that her daughter had been stabbed. Then on cue, the daughter stumbled out of the home. The lady must have been in her early 20s and dressed in jet black clothes. Before I could respond, the hysterical mother opened the sliding doors on my van and laid the daughter down on my equipment in the back. Now there was no turning back. I reversed the truck as fast as I could on the narrow street while my new passenger screamed in the back. But when I reached Mesaba Avenue, I knew that this trip would be no reenactment of the Fast and the Furious. Complete gridlock awaited me. I could feel my blood pressure explode, like that of a nuclear reactor in a meltdown. Is this what it's like to be an ambulance driver? I gunned the engine and raced through the last intersection, bringing the hospital into sight. Punching the horn, I pulled into the ramp that I believed was the ER, but a locked door impeded my entry. I pressed the call button and screamed that this stabbed woman needed urgent help. The voice on the other side said that I'd have to enter on the other side of the building. I continued to plead, but in the end only screamed at a wall. I gave up and returned to the van to find the lass lying awkwardly on my equipment. They won't let us in. I lifted her over my shoulder for the last block to the ER, but instead, she fell like a sack of sand. At that moment, I felt a terrible wave of sorrow wash over me. Had I failed this woman? Is she about to die here on the hot pavement? I can't let that happen. I ran down to an ambulance parked at the end of the street, where the EMTs were inside relaxing. This woman needs help. The EMTs got into action like trained soldiers, and I got to work applying pressure to the wound. They cut off her blood-soaked shirt and applied bandages while she laid out on the hot pavement. Then they brought in a stretcher and rolled her away. My exhaustion hit me like a ton of bricks. But I got no rest. My actions had made me, in a fashion, a celebrity of crime. 2 young officers arrived in pristine uniforms. They photographed me with their smartphones, and for the first time I realized that the damsel had smudged blood onto my shirt. I explained to them how it ended up there. Then another officer arrived, and the process was repeated. They must have considered me a suspect in the slashing of this young lady, because the officers wanted to seize my auto and uniform for evidence. When the officers were satisfied with their photographs, they escorted me into the hospital to change clothes. I looked like a gothic clown afterwards in a ridiculously tight black pants and vest. The afternoon was fading when I finally left the hospital to chill in the cooling atmosphere while the officers did their investigation. I'd become so popular that the local detective wanted a word. In the meantime, I got entertained by a parade of patients rolling into the ambulance entrance, and another officer arrived to supervise me. All that I could do was chill out until it was all over. An hour later, the detective arrived in a van marked Crime Scene Investigation. He was a balding, middle-aged man that couldn't hide his exhaustion. The man was more cheery than the officers, and he complimented me on my van, still splattered in blood, like that of a mischievous child. He had a real camera for the first time and took great care in photographing me again, along with the inside of my van. Then, like a celebrity on a press stint, I explained my recent activity before finally getting let free to drive home, to find 4th Street closed by 2 cop cars. To the man that stabbed that woman that afternoon, justice is waiting for you. You won't escape what you did to her. True story. I was around 5 or 6 at this time, and we were moving to a different province. We didn't have a place yet, so we were staying in a nearby shelter while looking for one. I forgot where the shelter was, but we were told it had been transformed into a shelter after someone decided to make use of the abandoned building. We were told it was half of an institution or something years and years before I was even born. Anyway, we had a strange room. I'd say it was about 8 by 9 foot room with a heavy metal door and 2 bunk beds, one on either side of the room. The bunk beds had metal framing and seemed a tad bit unstable, and the mattresses were hard. The floor was concrete, and not even a tiny window. But we didn't complain because we knew it was temporary. We were the only ones living in a room on that floor. I remember very vividly that my siblings and mother were in the kitchen preparing the food for the shelter, as it was their turn. That was part of the agreement to stay there. Plus, there were at least 40 other people. It was 2 to 3 floors and had a basement. So my mom opened the heavy door and let me in the room, turned on the light, and waited for me to climb the ladder to the top of the bed before saying goodnight. She then turned the light off and I snuggled in the blankets, but I couldn't fall asleep, so I stared at the ceiling. I don't know how much time passed, but I heard the bunk bed on the other side of the room creak, as if someone was climbing up the ladder, right across from mine. And since my older brother was the one who slept there, I spoke, thinking it was him, and he somehow quietly snuck in the room, so as not to wake me up. So, when I heard the creaking stop, indicating someone was on the mattress across from me, I said, "Hey, Aiden, you didn't have to sneak in. I can't fall asleep." Only to get no response. This was unusual for him, since he'd usually say something right away, either to tease me or to help me sleep. However, I got no response, just the sound of the sheets rustling a tiny bit. I assumed he didn't hear me, so I spoke louder. "Hi, Aiden. Did you guys finish the food yet?" No response. To this, I became a little bit worried that something had upset him. So I sat up and turned my head toward the bed, hoping that I'd be able to comfort him if he was upset. I barely got his name out of my mouth when I realized it wasn't him, but a dark figure of some girl around my age at the time. She had 2 braids and a puffy old-fashioned dress. She'd been sitting crisscross, staring and pointing in my direction. I, of course, got so scared I couldn't scream, thinking if I did, I'd be harmed in some way. So I stayed quiet and hid under my blankets. A few hours later, my mom comes in and turns on the light, with my siblings behind her. I saw the light on, so I automatically assumed someone was in the room, and I was safe. So I shot up, out from under my blankets, and quickly climbed down the ladder and hugged my mom. She asked me what was wrong, since I was still shaking. But me, thinking that the girl was still in the room, waited till the next day when we went out for our morning walk to explain to her what had happened. After explaining what happened, about how I couldn't sleep, and that I heard someone go on the bunk bed across from me, thinking it was my older brother, and then seeing the girl with the braids and the puffy dress, that was really just a pitch-black figure. My mom listened and was horrified. But just to be sure it wasn't my imagination, she went asking around people in the shelter about this supposed ghost, giving no details about what I had told her. This lady, we'll call her Courtney, told my mom, yes, there is a spirit roaming. It takes the form of a little girl that has 2 braids and an old-fashioned dress. She used to see me every night, but suddenly stopped when you guys moved in. We were the only children in the shelter, so that might have been the reason. I don't know. My mom replied to Courtney, well, my daughter has seen someone with the exact description you just gave me. At first I thought it was just her imagination. Anyway, Courtney walked away. Things were pretty quiet after that. I saw something run in the corner of my eye every once in a while, or I'd hear a sound of knives sharpening when there was no one in the kitchen, and the occasional sounds of screaming from the basement when I knew no one was down there. However, it was a family room you could book. One day our family booked it. There were kids' toys, colored maps, a wooden tiled floor, and a TV. I remember we were watching Land Before Time, and I looked on the dark side of the room, just out of curiosity. And there she was, standing in the middle of the dark side of the basement. She had just run around the corner. To give you some context, the basement was in an L shape. We were in one side, and this ghost ran into the other side of the L. Anyway, at this point, I'm more curious about her than afraid. I kind of thought she wanted to play since she was in the toy section of the room, so I followed her, thinking it was a kind of game of hide and seek. I stood up from the couch without a word, and my mom asked me where I was going, but I didn't answer. I just walked off into the dark side of the room. This was strange to her, since she knew I had a fear of the dark, as most kids do at that age. She was confused why I would go into the darkest side of the basement, where the light didn't reach willingly. She followed me, and I entered a dark closet. I started looking around frantically and kept asking, "Where are you? Don't you want to play with me?" Is that why you keep running around me? I asked over and over, questions along those lines. My mom was obviously concerned. She turned on the lights, picked me up, turned off the TV, and brought me and my siblings back upstairs. She asked why I was acting the way I was, and according to her, I said, she wants to play. After that, my mom and the rest of the family started getting scratches and tiny bruises mysteriously. Within a week of that, my mother found a place, and we moved there, leaving our toys and stuff behind, believing that a spirit might possess them and follow us. We only kept a few clothes, some money and a little food, and our IDs. We bought all new stuff from the store. We wound up living on the complete opposite side of town from the shelter. Nothing else has happened like that since, but it was one of the scariest experiences of my life. Hey everyone, Static here. I want to thank you for getting to the end of this video. I hope you've enjoyed the horror stories that appeared in this video. I want everyone to know that every story I read is with the full permission of the author, and that will always be the case. If you're interested in having one of your stories narrated by me, feel free to send me an email, which will be in the description. Since this is my inaugural video, I just want to let you know what you can expect going forward. As you can tell by the name of my channel, Simply Static, and the style of narration that I have, I've endeavored to combine storytelling, horror storytelling in particular, and what I call the static ASMR effect. So far I haven't seen any content creators combine those two genres, if you will, in quite the way that I have. So I hope you enjoy it. What to expect from this channel in the future? Well, I plan on posting once or twice a week. I'm shooting for twice a week, of course, but sometimes life gets in the way. But I plan on doing more of these kind of narrations, as well as some true crime. And I'd also like to launch a series where I read some classic literature. So if horror's not your thing, I hope one of those other series will pique your interest. So if you liked this video, please don't forget to like, comment, share, and of course subscribe, and hit that notification bell. So thank you again. And if you're looking for that static effect, stay tuned for the next video.